the heck is going on? It is the obscurest tourist here, and today I come to you from...
And the town even had railroad transportation.
There's a massive ghost town in America that almost no one talks about. Its empty streets and crumbling buildings whisper stories of a forgotten past. Few have seen it, but those who do never forget the strange silence that fills the air. Body, California. Once a bustling gold mining town, now preserved in a state of arrested decay. Body is not just any old town, it's a ghost town frozen in time. Sitting high in the mountains of California, this place was once full of gold miners, gunfights, and wild saloons. Now it's quiet, abandoned, and eerie. Walking through its dusty streets feels like stepping back into the past. The wind whistles through broken windows, and old buildings lean as if whispering their secrets. This town wasn't always so empty. Back in 1876, Bodie became a booming gold town after miners hit the jackpot. People rushed in, hoping to strike it rich. At its peak, nearly 10,000 people lived here, and Main Street was packed with saloons, hotels, and even a jail. It was rough and rowdy. Shootouts and robberies were normal. But just as fast as it grew, Body started fading. By 1915, people called it a ghost town. Even though Bodie's glory days ended, its mysteries remain. They say ghosts still roam the abandoned buildings, and some visitors swear they've seen shadowy figures in windows. The old cemetery, with its weathered headstones, adds to the town's eerie charm. Some believe there's even a curse. Anyone who takes an object from Bodie, even a tiny rock, is doomed with bad luck. Today, Bodie is a state park frozen in arrested decay, meaning everything stays as it was left. Shelves still hold dusty bottles, beds remain unmade, and rusted cars sit untouched. Every year, thousands of visitors come to experience this spooky, time-trapped town. If you listen closely, you might just hear the ghosts of Bodie whispering their long-lost stories. Do you enjoy watching these ghost town stories? Stay tuned with us until the video ends, and be sure to like and subscribe to the channel. Centralia, Pennsylvania, abandoned due to an underground coal mine fire that's been burning since 1962. Centralia, Pennsylvania is one of the creepiest ghost towns in America. It used to be a normal small town with homes, schools, and stores. But today, almost nobody lives there. Why? Because a fire has been burning underneath the town for more than 60 years. The streets are cracked, smoke rises from the ground, and the place feels abandoned, like something out of a horror movie. A long time ago, Centralia was a busy coal mining town. People moved there to work in the mines, and businesses grew. But in 1962, everything changed. A fire started in an old coal mine beneath the town. Some say it began when workers burned trash in a landfill, not realizing the flames could spread underground. Others think the fire was from an older coal blaze that never went out. Either way, it got into the coal seams and kept burning. At first, people didn't know how bad it was. Then, the ground started to get hot and dangerous gases filled the air. One day in 1981, a 12-year-old boy almost died when a giant sinkhole suddenly opened beneath him. That's when people realized the fire wasn't stopping. The government stepped in, buying houses and forcing people to leave. Today, only a few people remain, even though the fire is still burning. Streets lead to nowhere, and abandoned buildings have disappeared into nature. It's a strange, eerie place, like the earth itself swallowed the town. No one knows when the fire will go out, but one thing is sure: Centralia will never be the same. Kennecott, Alaska, a former copper mining town nestled in the Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Kennecott is one of the coolest ghost towns you'll ever hear about. It sits deep in Alaska, next to the massive Kennecott Glacier, inside Wrangell St. Elias National Park. Long ago, this place was booming with copper mines, trains, and workers. But today, it's quiet, frozen in time, with old red buildings standing against the mountains like a forgotten movie set. The story began in 1900, when two prospectors spotted a strange green patch high in the mountains. That green was actually malachite, rich in copper, and they had just found one of the biggest copper deposits in history. Soon, a young mining engineer, Stephen Birch, got involved, backed by powerful investors like J.P. Morgan and the Guggenheim family. They built a railroad, brought in workers, and created a town that once held hundreds of people. For years, miners pulled out copper worth millions of dollars, shipping it out on trains. In 1916 alone, Kennecott's mines produced $32.4 million worth of ore. But by the 1930s, the high-grade copper was running out. One by one, the mines shut down. In 1938, the last train rolled out, and Kennecott became a ghost town. The abandoned buildings tell eerie stories. The 14-story mill still stands, with rusting machinery inside. Old tramways once carried ore down the mountains. Some say the wind howling through the empty bunkhouses sounds like whispers from the past. Today, visitors explore these remains, hiking glaciers and climbing through the ruins. Kennecott may be empty, but its past still lingers, making it one of Alaska's most haunting places to visit. Rhyolite, Nevada, a short-lived gold rush town known for its crumbling structures and open-air art installations. Rhyolite, Nevada, is one of the most famous ghost towns in the United States, located near the eastern edge of Death Valley. It sprang to life in 1904 during the gold rush, quickly becoming a booming mining town. Investors flocked to the area, and within just a few years, Rhyolite had everything a growing city needed: hotels, banks, a stock exchange, newspapers, and even an opera house. At its peak, around 10,000 people called Rhyolite home. The town's success, however, was short-lived. By 1911, the mines had been depleted, and investors pulled out. The population began to dwindle as businesses shut down. By 1920, Rhyolite was nearly abandoned, leaving behind empty buildings and remnants of its once thriving community. Today, Rhyolite stands as a well-preserved ghost town, drawing tourists and history buffs who explore its ruins. Some of its most famous structures include the crumbling Cook Bank building, the old train depot, and a unique bottle house made entirely from glass bottles. It has also been a backdrop for movies and art installations, keeping its legend alive. Though the gold rush ended over a century ago, Rhyolite remains a fascinating reminder of Nevada's mining history, a place where fortunes were made and lost in the blink of an eye. St. Elmo, Colorado, one of Colorado's best-preserved ghost towns, originally a mining hub. Imagine walking through a town where time has stopped. Buildings stand, old signs hang, and the streets are empty, but the past still lingers. This is St. Elmo, one of Colorado's best-preserved ghost towns. Once full of life, it now sits quietly in the mountains, holding onto its secrets. St. Elmo was founded in 1880 during the gold and silver mining boom. Nearly 2,000 people lived here, hoping to strike it rich. The town had hotels, saloons, a newspaper, and even a school. It was a place of excitement where miners worked long hours and businesses thrived. But as the mines ran dry, things changed. By the 1920s, mining had slowed down, and in 1922, the railroad shut down. With no work left, people packed their bags and left St. Elmo behind. Sitting high in the Sawatch Range, 20 miles southwest of Buena Vista, St. Elmo looks frozen in time. The wooden buildings still stand, and the general store even opens in the summer. Visitors can explore old streets, ride off-road trails, and fish in Chalk Creek. But while it welcomes tourists, the town's few remaining residents are very protective of its history. Many say St. Elmo isn't just an old town, it's haunted. Some claim they've seen ghostly figures in windows or heard voices in the empty buildings. The spirits of the past may still wander, watching over their once bustling home. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing is certain: St. Elmo is a place where history refuses to be forgotten. Glen Rio, Texas, New Mexico, a deserted town that straddles the Texas-New Mexico border along historic Route 66. Glen Rio is a ghost town like no other, sitting right on the Texas-New Mexico border. Once a busy stop on the famous Route 66, it is now a forgotten place filled with empty buildings and stories from the past. If you drive by today, you'll see crumbling gas stations, an old motel, and a diner that hasn't served food in decades. But long ago, this place was full of life. Back in 1903, Glen Rio started as a railroad town. The name comes from the Scottish word glen for valley and the Spanish word rio for river. At first, it was just a train stop, but when cars took over, the town became a major stop for travelers on Route 66. By the 1930s, there were motels, gas stations, restaurants, and even a post office. But this town had a strange setup. Gas was sold in Texas because it was cheaper, while bars and motels were in New Mexico because Texas had strict alcohol laws. Things went downhill fast when Interstate 40 was built in 1973. Cars stopped coming, businesses shut down, and people left. By 1975, Glen Rio was almost completely abandoned. Today, it's a quiet, eerie place where the wind whistles through broken windows and old signs fade in the sun. There's still a bit of mystery here. The town sits in a disputed strip of land. Texas claims it, but New Mexico once tried to take it back. Now Glen Rio is mostly a ghost town, except for one business, a cannabis dispensary on the New Mexico side. A strange end for a place once filled with travelers chasing the American dream. Cahaba, Alabama. Alabama's first state capital, now an archaeological park. Cahaba is a ghost town filled with history, mystery, and long-forgotten stories. Once the first capital of Alabama, it is now a place of abandoned streets, crumbling ruins, and eerie silence. If you visit today, you'll find empty land where grand buildings once stood, and some say you might even see a ghostly light floating in the darkness. Back in 1820, Cahaba was chosen as Alabama's capital because of its location at the meeting point of two rivers. The town was planned with neat streets and a grand state house, but there was one big problem: flooding. The rivers overflowed often, and disease spread through the town, making people sick. Many believed the swampy air carried a deadly miasma. In 1826, Alabama had enough and moved the capital to Tuscaloosa. Even without the government, Cahaba became rich during the years before the Civil War. Plantations surrounded the town, and cotton money poured in. But when the war came, everything changed. The Confederate Army took Cahaba's railroad and turned a cotton warehouse into a prison for Union soldiers. In 1865, a massive flood hit, making life even worse for the prisoners. After the war, Cahaba never recovered. The county seat moved to Selma, businesses closed, and people left. By the late 1800s, it was nearly empty. Today, it's a historic park where visitors walk through the remains of Alabama's first capital. But some say the town isn't completely deserted. Stories of ghostly lights in the old garden maze still send chills down the spines of those who dare to visit after dark. Grafton, Utah, known for its picturesque setting and appearances in classic Western films. If you ever find yourself near Zion National Park, you might stumble upon a place frozen in time. Grafton, a ghost town in Utah, is one of the most photographed ghost towns in the West. With its abandoned houses, quiet streets, and eerie silence, it feels like stepping into the past. Some say you can almost hear the whispers of the settlers who once lived there. Grafton began in 1859 when Mormon settlers arrived to farm cotton, but nature had other plans. In 1862, a massive flood washed away most of the town. The settlers refused to give up and rebuilt a mile upstream, calling it New Grafton. For a while, the town thrived, with farms, orchards, and even a church. But life wasn't easy. The Virgin River carried so much silt that irrigation ditches were clogged every week, and settlers had to dig them out constantly. As if that wasn't enough, in 1866, fear of Native American attacks during the Black Hawk War forced everyone to flee to Rockville. Some people returned, but the floods kept coming, and by 1890, only 4 families remained. In 1921, the local church shut down, and by 1944, Grafton was completely abandoned. But the story didn't end there. In 1946, a movie producer bought the ghost town for film sets, and later, groups worked to restore it. Today, visitors can explore the preserved buildings, but don't stay too long after dark. Some believe the past still lingers in Grafton's empty homes and quiet cemetery. Goldfield, Nevada. Once Nevada's largest city during the gold rush, now a shadow of its former glory. Deep in the Nevada desert, there's a town that once glittered with gold, but now stands frozen in time. Goldfield, once the largest city in Nevada, is now a ghost town with empty buildings, forgotten stories, and whispers of the past. Some say if you listen closely, you can still hear the echoes of miners digging for fortune. Goldfield exploded in 1902 when gold was discovered, and by 1906, nearly 20,000 people called it home. It wasn't just a mining town. It had grand hotels, saloons, and even a famous boxing match. Wealthy investors like George Wingfield made millions here, while legendary lawmen like Virgil Earp kept order. But fortunes don't last forever. By the 1910s, the gold started running out, and pumping water out of the mines became too expensive. The people left as fast as they had arrived. As if the town wasn't doomed enough, disaster struck again in 1923. A massive fire, sparked by a moonshine still, destroyed most of Goldfield's wooden buildings. The brick and stone structures, like the Goldfield Hotel and the courthouse, still stand today like skeletons of a forgotten empire. Even though Goldfield is mostly empty, it isn't truly abandoned. Some people still live there, preserving history, while ghost hunters claim the old hotel is haunted. Every August, Goldfield Days brings visitors back to celebrate its past. Whether you're chasing history or looking for ghosts, Goldfield is a place where the past never really fades away. Thurmond, West Virginia. A deserted coal town located within the New River Gorge National Park. Hidden deep in the mountains of West Virginia, there's a tiny town where time has almost stopped. Thurmond, once a booming coal town, now has just a handful of residents. It may look empty, but its past is packed with wild stories of fortune, fire, and a little bit of trouble. Some say the ghosts of the old railroad workers and coal miners still linger, waiting for the next train that will never come. Thurmond was built in the late 1800s when Captain W.D. Thurmond claimed the land as payment for a job. He didn't allow alcohol in his part of town, but that didn't stop people from partying. Just outside his land, a rowdy area called Ballyhack was full of bars, gambling, and a hotel that became famous across the country. The town's massive Dunglen Hotel even burned to the ground in 1930, leaving nothing but memories. At its peak, Thurmond was alive with trains, coal, and business. But as steam engines faded and people left, the town became quieter. By the 1980s, the National Park Service started buying buildings, hoping to preserve history. Today, most of Thurmond belongs to the park, making it feel like a living museum. Even though the town is nearly empty, the train still stops here. Amtrak passengers step into history when they arrive, but they won't find a ticket booth or a waiting room. With only a few residents left, Thurmond might seem forgotten, but its past still echoes through the empty streets and abandoned buildings, waiting for someone to listen. Silver City Ghost Town, California. Remarkable collection of historic Gold Rush-era buildings, now a preserved open-air museum showcasing the Old West. Tucked away in Kern Valley, there's a ghost town where history refuses to stay quiet. Silver City isn't just an old collection of buildings. It's a place where the past lingers in the air, and maybe even in the shadows. Some say the spirits of miners and outlaws still walk these dusty streets, and after hearing the stories, you might start to believe it too. Back in the late 1960s and early 1970s, the Mills family began moving old buildings to Bodfish, saving them from destruction. These weren't just any buildings. They came from real gold mining towns like Whiskey Flat, Keysville, and Hot Springs. By 1990, Silver City was in rough shape until the Corlew family took over. They spent over 20,000 hours fixing it up, but not too much. They wanted to keep it looking like an abandoned mining town, not something brand new. Now Silver City is a museum, but it still feels alive. You can step inside the old Isabella jail, where a gunslinger named Newt Walker sat behind bars in 1905. The town has cabins, a church, and even a saloon packed with artifacts from the past. But some visitors don't just see history, they experience it. Many believe Silver City is haunted. People have seen bottles float, doors slam, and even a miner's lunch pail fly across a room. A violin in the general store sometimes plays a tune with no one around. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing's for sure: Silver City is a place where the past refuses to be forgotten. Red Oak 2, Missouri. A passionate restoration project by artist Lowell Davis, now a recreated ghost town preserving vintage Americana. Just a few miles from Carthage, Missouri, right off Route 66, sits a town that looks like a ghost town. But don't be fooled. Red Oak 2 may have old buildings, an eerie cemetery, and that frozen-in-time feel, but this place is very much alive. It's a town brought back from the dead by one man's vision. Back in the 1970s, artist Lowell Davis returned to his hometown of Red Oak, Missouri, only to find it abandoned. The place he grew up in was now a ghost town. But instead of leaving it behind, he decided to bring it back. He started buying up old buildings, moving them to his farm near Carthage, and restoring them. By the late 1980s, Red Oak 2 was born. A rebuilt version of the town he loved, filled with homes, shops, and even a vintage Phillips 66 gas station. Walking through Red Oak 2 is like stepping into the past. There's a general store, a schoolhouse, a jail, and even a blacksmith shop where Davis's great-grandfather once worked. But the most famous building is the Bell Star House, where the legendary outlaw once lived. Some say her spirit still lingers. Davis called Red Oak 2 his greatest artwork, and when you visit, you'll see why. His sculptures and old cars are scattered throughout the town, giving it an almost magical feel. Even though he passed away in 2020, his dream lives on. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, Red Oak 2 is proof that the past never truly disappears. Elkhorn, Montana. A silver mining town with a few remaining structures, including Fraternity Hall. Located in the Elkhorn Mountains of Montana sits a town that time forgot. Elkhorn was once a booming silver mining town, full of life and excitement. Today, only a few buildings stand. What is the population? Just a handful of people. But its ghostly past still lingers in the air. It all started in the 1800s when a Swiss immigrant named Peter Wise discovered rich silver deposits in the mountains. Soon, investor Anton Holter saw its potential and built a mine that would pull out over $14 million in silver. By 1890, Elkhorn was thriving, with 2,500 people, stores, saloons, and even a fancy hotel. Unlike many mining towns filled with rowdy cowboys, Elkhorn had families, mostly European immigrants looking for a better life. But with every rise comes a fall. The demand for silver started to fade, and tragedy struck in the winter of 1888 to 1889. A deadly diphtheria epidemic swept through Elkhorn, taking the lives of many, especially children. The town never recovered. Trains stopped coming, people moved away, and the once thriving streets became empty. Today, two of Elkhorn's buildings, Fraternity Hall and Gillian Hall, are preserved as part of Elkhorn State Park. A few old cabins have been restored, but the town still feels frozen in time. Visitors can explore the crumbling remains and imagine what life was like when the mines were full of workers and the saloons were packed. Some say the spirits of Elkhorn's past still wander the town, whispering stories of silver and sorrow. Burke, Idaho. Once a booming silver mining town squeezed into a narrow canyon, now an eerie ghost town with abandoned buildings and tunnel-like streets. Settled deep in the narrow Burke Canyon of Idaho, there's a ghost town with a past full of silver, danger, and disaster. Once a booming mining town, Burke had everything: trains rolling through, saloons packed with miners, and buildings squeezed so tightly together that one hotel even had train tracks running right through its lobby. But today, Burke is nothing more than an abandoned shell, slowly fading away. Back in 1884, miners struck silver, lead, and zinc. The discovery led to the birth of Burke, where thousands of miners came hoping to strike it rich. The town grew fast, with mines like the Hercules, Hecla, and Star pulling out millions of dollars worth of ore. But living in Burke wasn't easy. The canyon was so tight that businesses had to build right up against the train tracks. Some say you had to pull in your awning just to let a train pass. Burke also had its share of chaos. In 1892, tensions exploded when miners protested wage cuts, leading to violent clashes, a deadly shootout, and even an explosion that destroyed a mill. Then came the avalanches, one after another, burying homes and killing residents. By the mid-1900s, mining slowed, and people packed up and left. The last mine shut down in 1991, and by then, Burke was practically a ghost town. Today, the canyon remains eerily quiet. The abandoned buildings stand as reminders of a time when the town was full of life. Some say Burke never really died. Its past still lingers in the cold, shadowy valley. Shaniko, Oregon. Once the wool capital of the world, now a ghost town with preserved structures. If you ever want to visit a real ghost town, Shaniko, Oregon, is the place to go. Once a booming city known as the wool capital of the world, it's now a quiet place with just a handful of people. Old buildings, empty streets, and a mysterious past make it a fascinating stop on the map. Located in Wasco County, this tiny town sits at an elevation of 3,343 feet, surrounded by dry land covered in sagebrush and bunchgrass. From here, you can see towering cascade peaks like Mount Hood and Mount St. Helens. Shaniko's story began in the 1800s when gold was discovered in Canyon City, bringing settlers through the area. People set up camps, including one called Cross Hollow, which later became Shaniko. A man named August Chernekow, a Civil War veteran, moved here in 1874, and the town was eventually named after him, at least how the locals pronounced his name. The arrival of the Columbia Southern Railway in 1900 turned Shaniko into a major hub for wool, wheat, and livestock. At its peak, it shipped millions of pounds of wool and thousands of bushels of wheat, making ranchers and businessmen rich. But then, things changed. A new railroad route bypassed Shaniko, and business quickly dried up. By the 1930s, trains stopped coming, and by the 1980s, it was nearly deserted. Today, the town still attracts visitors, with some businesses open seasonally. Ghost town lovers come to see the historic hotel, the old jailhouse, and the abandoned streets. Some say the past lingers here, making Shaniko a place where history refuses to disappear. America is full of ghost towns, but some, like Shaniko, remain hidden gems that few have explored. These forgotten places hold stories of boom and bust, leaving behind eerie streets and whispers of the past. If you ever find yourself near one, step inside. You might just feel history watching you.